and then we'll get started.
Okay. So, hello everyone. Today we have Dr. Thomas Doyle and Dr. Ian Bruce with us for an engaging conversation about engineering in medicine and biology. Dr. Doyle is an associate professor in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering and is a part of the McMaster School of Biomedical Engineering. Dr. Bruce is currently a professor in the Electrical and Computer Engineering department as well, and is also involved in the School of Biomedical Engineering at McMaster. So thanks again, Dr. Doyle and Bruce, for joining us today to talk about engineering and its roles in biology and medicine. We would love if you two could begin by talking about how you got into the field of biomedical engineering and what are you currently doing in terms of research and other involvements.
Okay, so so my primary department, like Dr. Doyle, is electrical computer engineering, and I actually did my bachelor's degree in electrical and electronic engineering in Melbourne in Australia, where I grew up just north of Melbourne. And I went into electrical engineering partly because of interested sort of background in physics and math that I liked in school, but also I had started playing electric guitar as a teenager and was interested in audio and the electronics for electric guitars and effects and amplifiers, and thought, oh, it would be cool to study something related to that. And when I looked at physics programs that were available in universities in my state of Victoria in Australia, there weren't any strong programs in acoustics, but I also thought electrical engineering might give more options for jobs. And so I decided to go into electrical engineering, and largely forgot about that, apart from trying to apply for some summer positions with companies in Australia. There weren't a lot doing hardware for music, and I tried getting some summer jobs there without much success, unfortunately. But then in my fourth year, I was able to do an elective on digital speech processing that was really interesting. And part of that, we did a visit to the Bionic Ear Institute, which is a research institute connected to the University of Melbourne that was working on particularly bionic ears, that is Cochlear implants. And we're actually the group that first developed the first clinically and commercially successful Cochlear implant. That was back in the late 1970s, early 80s. I was in the early 90s when I was finishing up my bachelor's. But a lot of the same people were still around, and they were still doing a lot of the development of Cochlear implants and hearing aids. And I thought that was really good. And I applied for a PhD position there, but they did not have any funding when I was finishing my bachelor's. So I had an opportunity to go to Vienna in Austria and work there, and managed to get a position as a research and teaching assistant, where I was doing bioengineering research, not related to hearing, but related to related to measuring growth of bacteria, and it was a very interesting experience for me. And the Bionic Ear Institute thought they had some funding for me to go back into a PhD. That didn't work out, and I managed to stay for a second year. And then I went back to Melbourne and began my PhD. And so my research was on Cochlear implants and trying to use computer models to explain how auditory nerve fibers respond to electrical stimulation for Cochlear implants, and how that relates to what people were perceiving with Cochlear implants. So up until then, a lot of people were studying the physiology, and a lot of people were studying the perception, and people were not very brave at trying to link the two. And so there were a few of us more venturous people with the mathematical and signal processing backgrounds to try to use computer models to combine the two. And we ended up having a fair amount of success in that. I subsequently moved to Baltimore in the US for a postdoctoral fellowship in the Department of Biomedical Engineering at Johns Hopkins University, where we were trying to do similar things, not with cochlear implants, but related to hearing aids, so trying to look at a partial hearing loss, how we could develop computer models of that and come up with better hearing aids. And then I moved to McMaster in 2002. There were people both in ECE and the Psychology and Neuroscience Behavior Department starting to do hearing aid research, and they were very interested in having somebody who had expertise on the modeling and engineering side of things to join. And there was a faculty position open in ECE. And it also worked out timing-wise well that Dr. Hubert de Bruin had just been hired across from the medical school the year before, with the hopes that the department could start up a program in electrical and biomedical engineering. So when I was the second person to arrive, we sat down that first summer and came up with the program that was the original Elect and Biomed. So I've been teaching in that program while it existed, so the two third-year core courses, structure of biological materials and cellular bioelectricity. And now with the start of the new iBiomed program, I've moved to teaching the third-year biomedical signals and systems course in iBiomed, and now the cellular bioelectricity course is a fourth-year elective that students in ElecEng, CompEng, EngPhys, and iBiomed can take. So that's in sort of how I ended up where I am and what I've sort of been teaching. And in terms of research, it's expanded a bit. So I'm continuing to do cochlear implant research and hearing aid research. I've also, since I've been at McMaster, been doing a lot more experimental work as well. So some of that collaborating with the late Professor Larry Roberts, who was a professor emeritus in the Psychology, Neuroscience, and Behavior Department, who was studying the effects of hearing loss on brain plasticity, and particularly when it gives rise to tinnitus, the phantom perception of sound that some people get with hearing loss. And so we were using EEG and perceptual measures to try to understand what was changing in people's brains that when they had hearing loss to generate tinnitus. And we were starting to use computer models as well to try to explain some of the data. And then also I've been part of the live lab at McMaster, so that newer lab on the front of the psychology building, where we do a lot of performance and music neuroscience research. So that's a space where we do some evaluation of hearing aids in difficult listening conditions, and particularly interested in how hearing loss and hearing aids affect perception of music, but also other speech perception in difficult listening conditions. And again, we can do perceptual studies there with hearing aid users, but also we can use some of the facilities with motion capture, EEG, ECG, galvanic skin response respiration to measure their physiological responses to the tasks that they're performing, and get some insight. So a lot of biomedical signal processing also applied to those signals to try to understand how people's bodies and brains are coping with trying to listen with a hearing loss and with hearing aids, and how the hearing aids might be helping them, and what aspects of the signal processing on the hearing aids is helping them in these difficult listening conditions. So they're sort of my main research areas. And again, these collaborations with people at McMaster. And then I have also built up a fair number of international collaborations as well. So it's turned out this sort of initial idea of linking physiology to perception. So if we were one of the first research groups during my PhD to try that with cochlear implants, people had tried that with normal hearing and hearing loss and hearing aids to some extent, and there are a few other research groups around the world trying this, but it's not an easy thing to do, to really understand all the physiological data thoroughly, understand all the perceptual data that you're trying to explain thoroughly, and to have the mathematical and computer programming skills to come up with these models, to try to fit them to the physiological data and work out how you can use them to predict the perceptual data. That's a difficult task. So there's only a few different research groups around the world, mine included, who sort of specialize in that. But it does mean we end up with lots of groups who want to collaborate with us. They have some data that they can't explain, either physiological data or perceptual data, who say, can we collaborate, seeing if we can develop models that explain our data. So I've been fortunate to collaborate with groups in several countries in Europe, back in Australia, in the US, and also some in Asia as well. So so it's been an interesting sort of research area, and it's exciting that it does have applications to understanding what goes wrong with people's hearing, with hearing loss, with tinnitus, with use of hearing aids and cochlear implants. And some of what we do makes its way into these devices or into treatment strategies for tinnitus, which is very satisfying to see that translation of what we're doing. Oh, and one more project I should mention as well, another collaboration that sort of dropped in my lap, again, a group who were wanting to link the physiology and pathology to perception. So I've been, for a number of years now, collaborating with groups in Newfoundland, where there are different populations with different types of genetic hearing loss that were brought there by some of the founding families in Newfoundland, have been there for generations now. And so there are some extended families in different parts of Newfoundland with quite different types of genetic hearing loss. And we've been developing test batteries, including physiological and perceptual measures, to try to understand the particular pathology that they have because of the genetic mutation and how that affects their perception, and then trying to optimize hearing aids for their particular type of hearing loss. So again, that's another one that the modeling's involved with, but also a lot of biomedical signal processing, try to understand the data that we collect from those research subjects. I think I'm up to just under 15 minutes. But if there are a few questions at this point, I'm happy to answer them, or if we want to just keep it to the general question answer bit at the end, I can let Dr. Doyle go.
I think, yeah, thank you, Dr. Bruce. We do have questions for both of you at the end. So okay. If Dr. Doyle, you have your slides working?
I do.
Great.
So let's see, you should see a set of slides right now.
Yeah.
Yes, it works. We also see your desktop, so if you want to maximize. There we go.
Okay, how's that? You see it okay?
Good. Yeah.
Okay, so a couple of screens, so you should only just see a set of slides right now. All right, I structured a little bit differently than Dr. Bruce. The original request was to talk a little bit about my involvement on campus, my research lab, and how I came to be here. So thank you again for inviting me. You're right, I am an associate professor in ECE, associate member of School of Biomedical Engineering, but I'm also a faculty affiliate of the Vector Institute of Artificial Intelligence. And I guess people shouldn't think hearing aids are the only way to get into biomedical engineering, because that's how I got into biomedical engineering. And I will talk about that a bit. So in undergrad, I was fascinated with computer intelligence, machines, how they, computing machines, how they worked. And so that put me on the path of electrical computer engineering, but I also went into computer science. So I took a dual degree in parallel, and I figured at the end of it, I would never go to graduate school because it was too much work. But at the end of it, I realized I really enjoyed what I was doing. And I started graduate school with the intention of understanding better how computers and humans could interact with each other. So in an engineering description, that would be a closed loop communication or partnership. And that's where I started looking into hearing aids. And so in a slightly different path from Dr. Bruce, I was looking at human-computer interfacing using a hearing aid. And so the brain response through a BCI, and how could I use that to control the response of a hearing aid? Now, that takes me to my research interest with machine learning, artificial intelligence, intelligent systems, but specifically for medical application. The courses I teach here at MAC are the integrated cornerstone the first year, specifically in sensing and computation, second year digital logic design, second year microprocessor systems, and I teach a portion of the biomedical engineering core instrumentation and microcontrollers. Students may see me as an undergraduate advisor, and I'm formerly a director of an eHealth graduate program, which was an integration of engineering, health science, and business. My lab just is shortly called biomedic.ai, and some of the projects we're working on, we're looking at individual and team trust in medical AI. My question would be is how can you trust an AI model if you can't scrutinize it? And I would pose a question. The question would be, if you had to receive a medical diagnosis, would you prefer to receive it from a human physician or an AI physician? And I'm shocked at the polarity or the polarization of the answers from people I ask that question to. And it's always interesting to introspect, why the answer is the way it is. For me, it's both. And it's both because I see both have benefits. I agree, a pure AI response could be problematic, especially if you can't inspect it. But humans make mistakes. And so we could maybe have the best of both. Work that's extending from that. So that's actually Department of National Defense award to study artificial intelligence in autonomous medical advisory systems. And that spawned a number of projects looking at how do we know the response in the algorithm is trustworthy. So we're looking with one group, youth mental health readmission. We're working with another group, youth concussion recovery classification. Another group, chronic pain archetype classification. We're looking at embedded mobile machine learning models, active machine learning models, and AI-based personalization for medical imaging radiation exposure. If students or if anybody in your group would like to go and look up recent output from the lab, Omar Berselli, Emma Simmons have both put out some work recently, specifically in looking at problems in AI in medicine. So Omar's recent paper and evaluation for deep learning imputation is specifically for, if we have these very large data sets in medicine, what if we're missing data? Or what if we have corrupted data? Or what if we don't have enough data? Can we impute or create data that is statistically sound for our models? Emma's been looking at variance in sensors for machine learning performance. And Omar, some previous work looking at estimation of low dose radiation. So when you go and get something like an X-ray, are you thinking about the amount of radiation you're getting, and have you thought about its impact on your long-term prediction or possibility of actually developing cancer? What is the impact of that? So if it's okay, I'm just going to go through a couple of the student projects. Is that all right? Okay. So Omar, you may recognize him here. Sorry, I realize that image is pixelated. Omar is working on low dose imaging radiation. And so what that means is something like an X-ray. When you're exposed to it, what is the risk or the long-term risk? And so we have 10 years of medical data from HHS, and we're looking at, can we validate or invalidate one of the existing risk models. I won't get into the risk models, but Omar's work is looking at imputation. He's looking at effective dose estimation, and in terms of an AI approach, what are the transformer models and can they capture sequence or timed events? Emma is looking at trust in hardware, specifically in variants. And the rest of her is listed there. And I'll speed this up a little bit. Kashif is working on explainable AI methods and what is the stability in them, specifically for ECG classification. Ryan is working for small data sets. So we don't have a lot of data from this wearable specifically for concussion. So can we look at other data sets and transfer that learning to our problem? We have Asif is looking at clustering techniques for pain archetype. We have Sajjad, and Sajjad is looking at encoding or transformer techniques for classifying or quantifying readmission or resource prediction for youth mental health. Dr. Hadarian is a postdoc with my group looking at general trust methods in AI. Alex is an analyst with our group, and he's looking again at general methods, but he's also developing or integrating a lot of the other work for a D&D prototype. Work with other labs, Dr. Noseworthy, some of his students here, your group may know, Calvin, Lauren, Brian. We're working at, again, variants of different types of hardware. Calvin is with ultrasound, Lauren is looking at classification for youth concussion, and Brian is looking at brain lesion classification. I've left my contact information here, and I'm happy to expand on any of that if you have questions.
That was wonderful. Thank you. So I think we have, obviously you're in slightly different research areas, so our questions are a little bit more general. So obviously take them as you will. Just, yeah, answer them to whatever extent you feel fits. So I know Dr. Bruce mentioned failing to get summer positions. That's very relatable, but can you like describe or expand on other common hurdles and like students, new grads face and how to best overcome these?
Yeah, so I think that we often have sort of this plan of what would be ideal in our education and career path, and you need some flexibility and resilience that not everything is going to turn out the way you plan. And so I think part of it is having contingency plans, not that you want to, I think sometimes people try to leave their options open too much and it's sort of debilitating, not knowing what way to go. But I think having some contingency plans to say, look, this is what I'd really like to pursue, but if it doesn't work out, here are some other options that I go. And I think, again, our programs at McMaster, so the Alecan Biomed or now the iBiomed programs, for people who are in those programs, but even the Alec-Angel CompEng program, there are various paths that you could take career-wise with those programs, or graduate studies career paths that you could take with those, and heading down some particular path initially doesn't necessarily leave you stuck there. If you build up transferable skills and good experiences, so if you can get summer work experience, summer research experience, even if it's not exactly in the area that was your dream, if you build up skills there that are transferable, then that will give you a lot of options for the future, will allow you to seek different paths. And so I think particularly I would say in biomedical engineering, and particularly electrical and biomedical engineering, building up computer programming skills, building up signal processing skills will open up a large number of areas for you. If you're more interested in hardware, developing sort of skills in microelectronics and embedded systems, that can open a lot of graduate studies and career paths for you. So I'd say look for developing those sort of practical and transferable skills. If you speak to any employers or any potential supervisors for graduate studies, people skills, communication skills are also really important, and they're things that you can develop in a whole range of different summer positions. And so again, even if you can't get something in exactly your area of biomedical engineering, or even if it's not a biomedical engineering summer research position, getting in a job where you build up time management skills, communication skills, people skills can be really valuable for your future studies and career. And I suppose I'd say that the final bit of advice I would give is, if you have options, pick things that you really enjoy and you think you're good at. Picking things because you think it's somehow strategic that there could be jobs in that area in the future, or there's lots of grad school positions in that area, could be problematic if you don't actually enjoy where you end up. And doing well in something that you don't particularly enjoy is not necessarily the best experience either. So I would say pick things that you're really excited about, that you think you have some skills at, and pursue those. And if you do well, that's going to open up even more opportunities. And there's always going to be things that are outside of your control. There's limited openings in graduate schools. There's limited openings in companies that you're competing for, and some of it's outside of your control. But if you build up those transferable skills, you build up technical skills that could be good in lots of positions, and you pursue a range of things that excite you and you feel you're strong at, then opportunities will open up. And as both Dr. Doyle and I have explained, sometime that path isn't exactly how you envisaged, and maybe something ends up being really fruitful, or you get excited about later on in your career, that allows you to head off in a new direction. So that would be I realize that was a lengthy response, but hopefully fairly full response if Dr. Doyle wants to give his perspective.
Sure, I'll just add on to that. I mean, I think it's curiosity, I think it's flexibility, and I think it's core competencies. As I'm using myself as an example, I mean, I thought I'd be working in hearing aids or brain-computer interfacing. I hadn't considered at the time that the methods I was using to teach the computer the differences between the individuals, the machine learning, artificial intelligence, is really where everything would be going for me today. And that has that opened up a lot of doors when it suddenly struck me that, you know what, I actually really enjoy the intelligence and computation part. I'm sure I would have enjoyed the hearing aid part too, but it just took me in a different direction. And I can still ask interesting questions. I just had to be flexible. So, and the core competencies is do what you love, but know the fundamentals.
Yeah, that was really great. That actually answered one of my other questions, which was like, what are some of the essentials that students can learn now to help set them up? So got two birds with one stone.
Yeah, I would just say again that you talk to a lot of employers, and they will say generally if they're looking for bachelor degree program graduates, that they think that most of the bachelor's programs in engineering in Canada are great programs, and they can get good students out of it. And so those people skills, communication skills, time management skills, work ethic can be just as important as your technical background or your summer research or or internship experiences. And so I think being really worried about, well, have I taken exactly the right courses for what an employer might be looking for? In general, that's not such a big issue. On the other hand, because biomedical engineering is a somewhat more specialized field, and there might be fewer jobs in Canada in that field, there may be positions that they really are looking for people with technical skills. I think our combined programs, like I said, in McMaster, are really good at giving people a good background in the biomedical side of things, but also really strong technical skills. So there are some general biomedical engineering programs in North America that are a little too general, and students come out with a bit of background on the biomedical side, a bit of background on the technical engineering side, but not a lot of depth and strength in either of them. I think we've been able to craft these programs that people do have stronger technical skills as well as really good backgrounds on the medical and health side of things. So I think our graduates from the Electon Biomed program have been really sought after in graduate programs in industry. But that said, there are always going to be some jobs where going on to graduate school, doing a master's or a PhD is really giving that advanced technical knowledge that particularly the R&D departments in biomedical engineering companies are looking for. So it is something where I do think we need to encourage our bachelor students to realize that they may be able to get their dream job straight out of their bachelor's, but many jobs in biomedical engineering might require you to continue on to at least a master's. And again, our graduates from the Electon Biomed program have had great success in getting into graduate programs. We've typically had around 50% of our graduating students go on to a master's program or medical school or a professional program like law or MBA. So you do also need to think about furthering your qualifications if biomedical engineering is really what you want to do.
For sure. That's definitely good to hear that there's a lot of success for the graduates. So keeping the theme kind of on students, how would you recommend students get involved outside of classes to, explore their interests, further their skills and such?
I'll take that one.
Yeah, you go first.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I'll be honest, when I'm hiring, it's one of the first things I look for. Of course, I'm looking at grades and your statement of interest, but I'm always looking to see if students have developed an interest outside of the textbook or outside of class. So my advice is to find what you're interested in. So Dr. Bruce mentioned it was music. For me, it was computer hardware. I mean, find something that you have a real interest in and develop it outside of class and connect it to what you're learning with in class. And I mean, there's hackathons, but those are not the only way. People have hobbies in terms of programming, GitHub, development. For me, I just want to see that they can demonstrate the theory they're learning and connect it to something they enjoy. And I encourage that. So join a club, start a club, just get out and meet other people with the same interests. I think that's a really important thing. And of course, networking with people in other areas of biomedical engineering. I also see students have a paralysis that they are not an expert in everything biomedical engineering. That's impossible. But what you want to be is to have a good team, a core team, people you can learn from to build capacity. You don't start as an expert.
Yeah, I would say that there are many clubs and hackathon opportunities that actually suit themselves well to doing things virtually for the moment, but also in person. So my students, so graduate, but also one undergraduate student, were just in a Cochlear implant hackathon doing programming for a Cochlear implant that was set up by one of the Cochlear implant companies and some research groups. So they were set a task in developing new sound processing strategies for Cochlear implants that they competed in, actually were one of the top groups there. And again, they had a particular interest in music and hearing aids and Cochlear implants, so they focused on that and were one of the top groups in that category. There are also, there's a huge number of people now working on brain-computer interfaces with home kits. There are some issues about good electrode arrays that you can use at home, and dry versus wet electrodes. So whether you have gel or whether you try to have electrodes that are just sitting on the scalp, and how much they need to dig into the scalp to get a good electrical connection. But once you or you and your friends have some sort of kit, there's all kinds of resources out there for the hardware, for the programming. Again, there are competitions for different types of brain-computer interface challenges out there, and yeah, plenty of opportunities if you're interested in that to get involved with other people on those kinds of projects. And so again, I think it's typically these projects are a little more the programming side of things, which may be, as I said, at the moment, while things are a little more virtual, they lend themselves more to that. But there's also plenty of groups that are working on more hardware aspects. So there are groups that are developing the hardware side of things for home EEG-based brain-computer interface systems. There's a limit to that. Obviously, you can't do home-based implantable medical electronics or skeletal prostheses or something like that. But there are groups out there. There are communities of people working on things that you could join.
Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, I know the IEEE McMaster branch has always got open doors for anyone that's interested. So switching back to kind of both of your interests, what are you looking forward to the most in advancements in your respective fields, or in general?
Do you want me to go first, Tom?
Sure, I'll take that one. I'm looking most forward to the integration of the partnership of AI with humans. I mean, that to me seems to be the ultimate goal, is to interact with a non-human member of a team and be able to trust it. And so that to me is an exciting outcome that I think is not too far away.
Yeah, I could say that a lot of development in hearing devices and treatment for hearing disorders has been limited by our understanding of how the brain works. So again, we can work on computer models of how the ear is processing sounds, and we're getting them pretty close to saying we've really captured the fundamentals of how the ear normally works and what things go wrong in different types of hearing loss. But then even the circuits in the brainstem where those auditory nerve fibers go into, our models of that are still very crude. I have one PhD student who's working on some of the models of neural circuits in the auditory brainstem, and we feel like we're making progress with that. But even in the last year, there were some new neuron types that were discovered in the mammalian brainstem that we didn't know existed more than a year ago. And so knowing exactly how those neural circuits are processing the input they're getting from the ear That knowledge is developing all the time. And then that's just that first stage. There's all the other stages involved in the initial sensory processing of what people hear, and then the language centers and other centers of the brain that are connected with our emotional response to sound, our movement response to sound, that we still don't fully understand. So I think this more and more knowledge of how the brain works, which is developing at an accelerating rate, is going to give a lot of new possibilities. But on the other hand, there have been limitations on the technology side of things in terms of exactly how miniaturized the hardware can be, the power consumption issues for hearing aids and cochlear implants, the ability to stream audio to and from devices. And again, there's hardware breakthroughs that have come in recent years or are coming that might allow for more components to be implanted or to do things with less power consumption. Or in the case of cochlear implants, one of the big difficulties all along is that you take this electrode array and insert it along the inside of the cochlea, which is basically this bony structure filled with fluid, and we're delivering electrical currents that just spread everywhere, and particularly along the length of the cochlea because of the bony walls of the cochlea, whereas the neurons are on the other side of some of that bone. And so when you're delivering current from one electrode, you're trying to stimulate the nearby neurons that are encoding the sound frequencies that are supposed to be encoded in that part of the cochlea, but actually the current spreads along the length, and you're actually stimulating typically around a quarter of the length of the cochlea or more. So the sound frequency specificity of cochlear implants is really crude. It's just enough for speech in quiet. Some people for speech in noise, it's not bad, but other people really struggle. And for music, it's actually pretty horrible for most people. It just doesn't have that sound frequency resolution that's needed for really complex acoustical stimuli that you get from our complex music that we like listening to. And there are breakthroughs coming in terms of optical implants that can go in and optically stimulate the nerve fibers rather than electrically, so you don't have that big problem with current spread, or the possibility of implantable electrode arrays in the nerve itself rather than in the cochlea, so you're actually getting closer to the individual nerve fibers. So there's a lot of surgical and safety issues with that. There's issues with the optical implants. That there was some hope that you could actually just through LEDs or low power lasers directly stimulate the nerve fibers. It turns out that the response that they found for that in experimental animals was because of heating of the nerve fibers, and you don't really want to be heating up the nerve fibers to get responses out of them. And so you actually need to do a transfection where you add these ion channels into the nerve fibers that respond to light. So we can do that in animal models, but we don't yet have the safety studies done to know, can we do that safely in humans without causing other problems? And also the electrical response to the light tends to be a little slow. They're developing faster light sensitive ion channels that hopefully will be fast enough in their electrical response that you could encode sound information in a cochlear implant. If that works, there's all kinds of other implants. So I know people who are working on retinal implants for people who are blind. There's even more problems with the electrode arrays for the retina and how you implant them. If you could optically stimulate the optical nerve, then that could avoid a lot of those problems. And other types of neuroprostheses, again, it could be much simpler to do it and much more accurate to do it with optical stimulation than electrical stimulation, because of these issues. If you put electrodes in the tissues of the body where there's all these electrolytes, then you get this uncontrolled current spread. If you can optically target neurons, then it's much more specific stimulation. So I think there's lots on the hardware that's really exciting, but it's probably a few years away. There's still a lot of developments but before it can be clinically applied.
Thank you. Yeah, it sounds like both of you have some pretty exciting things coming up and things to look forward to. So I think that's all the questions we have for you. So thank you again, Dr. Doyle and Dr. Bruce, for joining us. Any parting remarks?
I'll let you go first, Dr. Bruce.
Yeah, I would just say, so one of the questions you had sent us ahead of time was about, and we may have partially covered this, but a common mistake that people make when trying to enter biomedical engineering. I would say one of them is just judging sort of how much on the biomedical and health side of things you need to know, you need to care about. Sometimes if you're more drawn to the technical side of things, it may be more that you're interested in these applications and you're not that interested in the sort of wet, messy side of things or the clinical side of things. And I just say, that's okay. You just need to then be strategic about what areas in biomedical engineering you pursue, but you at least need to be prepared to learn the fundamentals, learn the language. If you're going to talk with people who are scientists or clinicians working in a field, you need to at least have some of the same common language, even if you're not going to become a medical doctor, a clinician yourself, or become an experimentalist working on the wet, messy side of things. You need to at least learn the basics and the language so that you can communicate well with them. If you like that clinical or wet sort of biological side of things as well as the technical side, then that's great. On that though, you are possibly going to have the frustration that you're never going to have the time and mental capacity to be an expert on both that sort of clinical biomedical sciences side of things and the engineering technical side of things. So if you're going to be sort of an integrated biomedical engineer who is working on both sides of the equation, you have to be prepared to deal with some frustrations that you're never going to know or be able to work on everything that interests you, and you have to just realize your limitations. So in terms of the bio and the med side, you need to have some, like I said, some realistic expectations of what you are interested in and what you're capable of learning and tackling in your studies and your career on that side.
Yeah, and I'll just add on, I mean, I touched upon it before, is this concept of expertise and students feeling paralyzed because they're not an expert from the beginning. And it's important to remember, nobody starts as an expert. You need to build and develop that. Dr. Bruce hits on a very important point, is that the terminology between different domains shouldn't be underestimated. I mean, we're trying to solve the same problem, but often talking a slightly different language. So getting out and meeting other students, other people in peripheral domains is really important because you really want to be able to work with those people. You can't be an expert in everything. And I think students should embrace that. I think they should embrace, they've been through a really tough, rigorous program. You can learn anything. Don't be afraid to try something new.
Definitely some great words of wisdom. Thank you both again for joining us today. And I will stop the recording here.